Good morning, everybody. I was told that I could ask to have some lights in the hall. I always have this kind of allergy of speaking into a complete darkness where I can perhaps see the first 2 or 3 rows. So I'd really appreciate if the technicians could make sure that I can also see the rest of you, because I think it's something to do with establishing a contact between us. I'm delighted to be here this morning. This is my first direct contact with SIS, and I'm fascinated by the subject matters that you deal with. And I'm going to be here just taking you a little bit out of the discussion you had, or the intervention you just had, and try to put you in the context of why the European Union, and particularly the European Commission, is active in the field of sports. And to take you back a little bit, 2.5 years ago, my Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, took office, and he said that this new Commission will have one single overriding priority for the next 5 years. That is to be the Commission for the young unemployed. We had at that time more than 5 million young unemployed in Europe. And some of you in this hall come from member states where the youth unemployment rate is 45, 50, or 55% in some areas. So we could not see anything more important than simply fight youth unemployment. Now, everybody knows that the agenda is never so simple. It would have been nice if we could have just settled down and discussed youth unemployment. We couldn't, and we can of course now see 2.5 years later that things are significantly improving. But one of the things we did in my area was to try then to exactly focus on the whole sector of sports and try to generate a greater understanding of the economic importance of the sector of sports. Everybody in this hall, I'm sure, and mostly also outside, are fully convinced about the benefits of sports as such. It's good for us. To do sports, to have an active lifestyle, is very good for you and for me and for everybody. But what we have not always had and not always fully realized is that the economic sector of sports is actually very, very significant here in Europe. Now, you can always discuss how you define that sector, but we have at least come forward with the fact that we believe slightly under 2% of the GDP in Europe is generated by this sector, subject to how we define it. And between 4.5 and 5 million people in Europe are directly employed in this sector. So we believe that there's a huge argument for generating an understanding among our politicians and everybody else who decides about the European Union that the sports sector is not only about the health benefits of it, while that cannot, of course, be overestimated. Now, we also know that physical inactivity is another dimension to our lives, and it is hugely costly to our societies. We believe that it could probably be something like 1% of GDP which is lost by too many people being physically inactive. To give you just a precise example, the illustrious former French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Michel Barnier, who is now responsible for the negotiations with the UK about Brexit. And I had a meeting some months back, and he told me about a project in Alsace, where some young people who were gymnastics instructors in the schools had decided to create their own company with the purpose of traveling around and visiting people in the homes for old people, with the single purpose of creating a program of these old people being physically active. And after some months of having done that, each of these homes started seeing measurable advantages for them, of course also for the old people. They were able to get out of bed without support. They could go to the toilets without support. They could dress themselves. So instantly there were huge financial benefits for the local community. They needed, to be totally honest, less staff to look after these old people, while the old people themselves gained some confidence in their own lives because they could suddenly again begin to do things that they otherwise would have needed support to do. So there's a lot of benefits from this that we really need to have brought to the fore. Now, as you know, and this is a very sad thing, the European Union is confronted with huge challenges of a more societal nature these days. I was in Nice last year, just 4 weeks after 82 people were killed on the Promenade des Anglais, and we are just experiencing the same nightmare, radical Islamic violence and terrorism in Manchester and in London. And for us in the European Commission and in the European Union, sports is again an element. It may sound odd to you, but let me try to explain to you what I mean. For us, it's a way of trying to reach young people who are otherwise incredibly difficult to reach. Many of the young people, and we know unfortunately that many young people become radicalized at a younger and younger age. 5, 6, 7 years ago, our studies showed that young people were perhaps radicalized or drifted towards radical Islam when they were in their late teens. Now we have scientific studies that seems to indicate that for the first time, they already start drifting into this kind of thought framework, mind framework, when they are 13 or 14 years old. And it is incredibly difficult to reach them. We, of course, try that through our educational systems. We try it through our social services. We have so many ways of doing it. But when I talk about, for instance, the young Belgians who went here to Paris to commit horrendous terrorist crimes only a year and a half ago, they were not unemployed. They had all their families in Belgium. Their friends were there. They went to school there. And still, they did not feel they belonged, like the ones who went and blew up themselves in the metro in Brussels or in the airport in Brussels. And for us, this is where sports comes in. Sometimes in some communities, you can only reach some of these young people through sports. They don't fit into a social fabric where you can have social services reach them in a normal sense. They will not sit down and talk to social workers. But sports is this kind of fantastic environment built on values, built on group work and team building and belonging to some friend or belonging together with some friends to a club. And therefore, sports can be a vector for generating values that are incredibly important. So for us, sports is a way of promoting social inclusion, particularly targeting groups which are marginalized. And here in Paris, you know more than anybody else about what that means. You have neighborhoods not that far from here where it is incredibly difficult to reach the young men and also some young women. So sports is for us an incredibly important element in our lives. Now, EU has the sports policy. It may sound odd. Many of you, and perhaps those of you who come from outside the EU, will not identify EU with sports, but it has a policy of underpinning sports activities and sport policies in the member states. We have a plan for sports, which is a framework for debate and for supporting what is done in the member states. It aims at simply create opportunities and, of course, to address the threats to sports, because you are in the field of innovation. But you will be as much impacted as everybody else about some of the things that we see. The issues that I want to mention is just violence in sports, very poor governance in some sectors of the sports, corruption, doping, and match fixing. These are a cocktail that can kill anything. And it is therefore crucial that we address them together and we work together to find opportunities to find solutions to these issues. Because without that, the sports world will suffer, and so will the sports industry. And we have therefore, at the European Union level, oriented some of our funding towards addressing these issues. We work very close with WADA about doping. We work very closely with the Council of Europe about match fixing. And my commissioner, Mr. Navratil, has last year launched a pledge board which related very well to what you just heard here about good governance in sports. None of us can forget what we have seen in the big football federations, or for that matter, what we saw with the Olympics last summer. So far, and these are the good news, 43 major European federations and sports organizations have signed up to good governance. Good governance, which implies transparency and efficiency in how they promote gender equality, just to pick up on one point you just heard about. The European Union has a budget of 267 million euros for sports activities that we support over 7 years. And we do that to tackle cross-border threats to the integrity of sports. Only 2 years ago, we launched something called the European Week of Sports, which aims to promote sports and physical activities across Europe. And I can tell you, 6 months ago, in the last edition, we had 15,000 events in the European area, and more than 10 million people were active during that week, specifically relating to activities about the European Week of Sports. And to give you an example, because I can see everybody just nods and says, yes, yes. For instance, we had schools where it was decided that during that period, every day, they would have their usual gymnastic classes like we all had when we went to school. But this time around, all the pupils went into the courtyard with all the teachers. So also the French teacher and the math teacher were involved in physical activity 3 or 4 times during that week with all the pupils to try to break out of the box of sports being just for 1 hour here and there, and only for those who are specifically in that framework. And of course, we have a work plan for sports. I just mentioned it, which will run until 2020. And it speaks about the, as I said, the integrity of sports, the economic dimension of sports. And this is, of course, where so many things come in, because not only the jobs and the GDP, but also the economic well-being of the sector is at the heart of our reflections, and sport of the society in general terms. Now let me end by turning to also something you just heard about, which is the question of sustainability. It is clear, I don't want to, this is Paris, and everybody has Paris and environment up in their minds these days. But we do want to push the sports world and sports in general to become a more sustainable sector for all of us. It has a significant and growing impact on European economy and society, and we believe that sports can contribute to reaching the goals that the European has set itself for smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth by 2020. This is why we have the concept of circular economy, which aims profoundly on transforming the way our entire economy works, also the sports economy, by making sure that we have product life cycles through greater recycling and reuse and more innovative and efficient ways of producing and consuming. The transition to a more circular economy is essential for Europe's contribution to the development of a sustainable, low-carbon, resource-efficient, and competitive economy in the coming years. There is no doubt that you are part of the answer. And I say that honestly. Innovation and new innovative approaches are at the core of finding solutions to the sustainable challenges we are confronted with. Sports brands have already picked up on this, are showing the way by using innovative approaches to recycling and reusing their products. The kind of innovation and commitment we see from them to the circular economy has also been very brought forward at major sporting events in the last few years. And innovation and digital economies in sports covers a multitude of fascinating areas, as evident from the agenda of this meeting the next 2 days. Earlier this year, Malta organized with the European Commission what we call the EU Sports Forum, which brings together 400 or 500 of Europe's leading sports activists and sports industries to discuss together how we can take forward our shared agenda. And there, we looked exactly at how innovation and technologies can leverage the full potential of EU's digital single market by matching innovation and ever-growing consumer expectations and demands. What fascinated me at that Malta Sports Forum was the broad scope of innovation and digital technologies in sports, from wearable technologies to innovative business-to-business solutions and sophisticated data analytics that provide competitive edge, which is of course very important for the industry such as yours in these days. Sports can also spur advanced forms of economic development at local and regional level. It's not only for the whole of Europe, and we are therefore very much supporting cooperation between regional actors such as local sports industries, research institutions, and universities, and we are putting a lot of money behind that. And finally, a platform for European regions investing in smart specialization through sports has been launched with the financial support of the European Commission. What is clear is that innovation for us is synonymous with dynamism. Innovation means looking ahead and making breakthroughs. And we have a role, all representing various public authorities, whether it is European, national, regional, or local. And we are willing and we are putting money behind our policies to promote this. I close by saying that I already believe that we need a debate about these things. Innovation is at the heart of the solutions for Europe. Innovation is therefore also a part of the future of the sports world. And we welcome very much the cooperation that we see between the sports world, both the sports side as we see, whether it's the IOC or whether it is UEFA, etc., and researchers, industry, and of course universities and educational institutions. Together we are sure that we can find a situation in some years down the road where we will have a very, very competitive European sports industry contributing significantly to the sustainable European sports world and in general for a sustainable environment. So thank you for inviting me to come here today, and I look forward to hearing the contributions and the discussions you're going to have in the next 2 days. Thank you.